Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webinar today. I'm Swapnil Saxena and I work at the National Institute of Urban Affairs in Delhi, and I work for the city's program management unit. So today's webinar, as you all know, is a discussion on the process of designing and planning sustainable streets. So for those of you who have been regular at our webinars, you know that we discuss the concepts of designing and planning streets to ensure road safety. In the previous webinar, it was a more technical discussion which focused on discussing the street design guidelines and their application to projects. So this webinar basically follows from the previous discussion. Today we will discuss the importance of street design in a broader sense, covering broader urban sustainability issues. The panelists today are going to use examples from their practice and from across the world to discuss how road projects can, deliver livability and environmental benefits while achieving mobility and safety objectives at the same time. So to moderate this session, we have with us Michael King. He is the founder of the consulting practice called Traffic Calmer in New York. Michael is an urbanist and he works extensively on mobility, urban design, and traffic engineering projects across the globe. He's also the mentor with us. He works with NIUA with the cities program, and he mentors the cities doing mobility projects, Amritsar and Dehradun. So thank you, Michael, for accepting to be the moderator today. Without taking much of everyone's time, I would like you to please introduce the panelists before we can commence the discussion on today's topic. A little housekeeping rule, there is a live Q&A option. It's on the control panel on your right. So please feel free to drop in your questions and the panelists will be answering them live. We will also have time for discussion and for taking questions at the end of the webinar. So yeah, let's proceed. I think over to you, Michael.
Oh, thank you, Swapnil. One thing also for the link previous webinar on safe streets, put in the Q&A once we can figure out how to do that. So if you did not, Swapnil, if you can do that actually, that would be great. If you did not attend that, then you can watch it today. So good. So this webinar began with a conversation I had with a person in India who was designing a street. And I said, "What about a bioswale and something to manage the stormwater?" And the answer was, "It rains too much." And so I thought, well, you're obviously not. You've completely lost the plot on what the heck Sustainable Streets is about. So I called up some of my friends, new and old, and who know a little bit about sustainable streets. And sustainable streets is defined as something that processes the environment and is long lasting. So Byron Stiggy is going to lead off. He's with a shop here in Brooklyn, New York City called Level Infrastructure, and he does gigantic sustainability infrastructure projects around the world, and including India. He's going to be followed by Sujata Hingarani, if I said that correctly. And she's going to focus on sustainable streets in India because she's based in New Delhi and has a lot of experience there. Her firm's called Oasis Designs. And then wrapping it up is going to be Stephen Burgess of Tasmania, which is part of Australia, a COVID-free part of Australia. And he runs a shop called Complete Streets, and he's going to talk about, in fact, complete streets and sustainability streets and the whole sort of thing about how all this fits together. So, as a rule, what we're doing in the industry is we're moving away from pavement, asphalt, macadam, whatever you want to call it, concrete, and we're moving from just that black tar to to something much more holistic. And it's something that is happening, and it's something that can happen. It's happening in India, and we would like more of it to happen as well. So let's shift to Byron, and you have 15 minutes. Go.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning here in New York. My name is Byron Stiggy from Level Infrastructure. I thought Michael asked me to start with a broad perspective on sustainable streets. My practice is infrastructure engineers. We're civil engineers and transportation planners, and we work on a lot of master plans and sustainability plans at a kind of neighborhood and city level. And our practice really focuses on integrated design between systems. So, we're not only focused on stormwater. We also work on bike lanes and renewable energy and solid waste management. Try to see how those systems work together from an engineer. So that's what I'll be focusing on today. And our practice focuses on achieving sustainability requires systems thinking, interconnected symbiotic systems, nature-based systems, post-carbon infrastructure, climate adaptation, and inclusionary and a participatory process, not a top-down process, but a bottom-up process. And those are kind of big principles, and I think we all acknowledge that, when you start talking about sustainability, some people go right to solar panels or bioswales or right to some technology. Sometimes there's broad statements about resilience and holistic systems, and we found it to be helpful to try to structure all of these, benchmarking systems and how much do things cost. Try to structure it in a way, try to make more of a sustainability as a process more than just a technology or a product. So starting with those vision principles is important, and then getting some key performance indicators and actually making some targets for yourself before you even start the design process. Then, once you have some targets, you can measure those costs and how you're doing against your targets and iterate between costs and design and your targets. So just an example, as we did this with MIT and a landscape master plan for stormwater management, the principles were kind of broad concepts of healthy campus and in natural systems. Our actual goals were to reduce pollution in the river, to reduce flood risk, increase biodiversity. Then we actually had specific metrics of phosphorus load and key biodiversity indicator species, soil health. Those were the metrics of success, but then we measured how much tree canopy did we have, rainwater harvesting volumes, island, percent of non-roof services. And that translated into the design strategies, so bioswales and actual green roof technologies, impermeable pavements. And then we evaluated, code compliance and costs and life cycle costs and getting those budgets together. So you can see that kind of arc of the sustainability framework that we use in our practice, and we find it to be helpful to put those sort of broad statements in place with the details. I'm going to show you how we work through a similar process there in India and Dombivli. I'm sure you've heard of Palava with the Lodha group east of Mumbai, about 20 kilometers or so. I started working on the project about 10 years ago, the concept master plan with Sasaki. Lodha group has about 10,000 acres or so. It's a really large, couple large parcels, and we developed kind of a mixed use integrated neighborhoods around green spaces and lakes, but with strong urban corridors with residential streets on the side. And you can see, quite a lot of residents, quite a lot of jobs projected. And so in the context of this webinar, I wanted to talk about the process I've been working off and on this project for 10 years, and some things have been built, and we've learned a lot of lessons in that time. and I wanted to share some of those with you all. So we started again with these broad goals, and I think our most ambitious goal, considering the environmental issues in Mumbai, east of Mumbai, was water. And so we really wanted to understand how can the city reduce the drinking water demand dramatically, not just with low flow fixtures, but with not just like building by building systems, but neighborhood and city scale solutions. How do the streets fit into that? So we looked at a variety. One of the most important aspects always is wastewater treatment and recycled water. And because there are hundreds of buildings on these parcels, the kind of more typical solution with building by building wastewater treatment and recycled water wasn't really desirable. You can really have economies of scale and improve the technology and cost when you work at a larger scale. So you can see the streets were the primary corridors conveying the wastewater treatment. We looked at a decentralized system and a centralized system. Ultimately, we went with a centralized system. You can see the streets were the sort of vertical trunk, north-south trunk lines for stormwater and wastewater and recycled water and parking, et cetera, et cetera. And so actually in the background, I don't have too many good photos of these buildings, but they're actually quite nice parking garages with a nice facade treatment. But they're integrated buildings. They're not just car parks. That's where the wastewater treatment plant is located. That's where the recycled water is stored. That's where the bikes are stored. That's where the waste is transferred. There's an electrical substation there. So a lot is happening in those sort of utility buildings. And so that means the streets leading up to those are quite filled with utilities. So the street is a sort of, performing the function of making the neighborhood and the city more sustainable and functional to achieve those broad sustainability goals. So this was the section, one of the early sections from the design team, from the architectural team, and the first time I looked at it, it was noticeably missing anything below the pavement line, and I think sometimes we see that a lot. You just designers are thinking just about what's happening with what you can see. But there are a couple things that are good here. There's these big trees that provide a lot of shade. We were thinking more trees on these corridors would enhance the environment. And there was a cycle track, bus stations. There's a nice sort of sense of that nice kind of retail and walkable spine. So we thought that was a lot of positive things. But what ended up happening is when you overlay all the utilities, you don't have room for the trees or the street lights or the swales or anything else. And so really have to, in terms of a design process, really have to think about, there's a lot of stuff that goes in a sustainable street. There's just going across from left to right, there's the ICT cables, there's electrical lines, there's drinking water, there's storm water, there's a sewer line, there's a street lights, there's irrigation for the trees, there's a street lighting electrical lines, there's a catch basin, more storm water, and more electrical cables. So there's just a lot going on, and we struggle to get any of those utilities in the street. You can see the street here is just pavement. And all the manholes and all the utilities are in the sidewalks, and that created a real, it really took away from the quality of the street, because now it's not shaded, and now there's a big setbacks between the buildings. The trees are set way back, and so as we move forward in the project, we're trying to push as many of those utilities, not all of them, but some of the utilities into the street right of way, where you can put these manholes, and you can then allow some space for green features and other stormwater management and urban heat island effect improvements. So you can see how some of that starts to improve over time. As it's a great project to learn on, because as you build phase 1 and then phase 2 and then phase 3, you can always learn and improve from the design. So that's happening, as you can see, in these further sections, and really nice kind of walkable street separated from the roadway. And really coming along nicely, real high density, sustainable neighborhood with a really dramatically low water use. Coming along quite nicely. Next, I'm going to share a little bit more about how streets can really be catalytic to urban development. We were asked to do a city plan for Kabul, Afghanistan, and also with Sasaki in the last few years. And there's a lot of informal neighborhoods in Kabul. Really, reconstruction time is happening. A lot of donor funding, and so trying to coordinate all that donor funding with a framework for the whole city. But what became clear is that these major sort of radial streets and roadways were the kind of core for the urban life, and then those residential streets were more quiet and private. And that was an opportunity to really revitalize the city through integrated streets. And of course, the landscape and the urban design were all developed. But from our work, we use those corridors as the primary pathways for trunk stormwater, trunk electrical lines, trunk wastewater systems, again, at a kind of city scale. And so by developing that corridor, that sustainable street, then over time, the networks can be built out. With the public investment in the streetscape, a lot of private and community investments can then bring water and sewer and power and ICT into that trunk line, and then recycled water as well. So the function of that street is just so much going on. There's a BRT line. There's the street trees and the bike lanes, storm sewers under the BRT lines, drinking water lines in the sidewalks, electrical lines in the sidewalks, bioswales. Really sort of rich and complex street design. And the idea was just to focus on a kind of investment in that urban corridor that then would have spillover effects and rejuvenate the neighborhoods on either side. Of course, it's not just a design process, and we really learned that on this project in Kabul when we started to map the stakeholders that are working in that roadway. I mean, it's not just the Ministry of Public Works. And there's the municipality itself, and the bus riders, and the donors. There's the water supply. There's the power company. There's private developers, and of course, most importantly, communities. There's so many stakeholders that are engaged in streetscapes, and so getting them all on board with the vision and the opportunity of making sustainable streets was actually as much a part of the design and the project as the actual cross sections and where do the utilities go. And so this was the vision of these sustainable streets, to sort of really bring Kabul back to a 21st century, really rejuvenate the city and look forward instead of backward for the people who live there. We have a lot of experience all over the world, and one thing that I've noticed as I travel in every city, and even different parts of cities, they have a way of doing things. The streetscape looks like this, but every one of these streets is different. Every one of these municipalities and communities and cultures and weather patterns and things is different. And so, obviously, it's what works in San Francisco is not going to work in Delhi, but there's some things you can learn from others. And I really try to encourage people to look beyond their own streets and look around the world and just try to pick some good things that you see, that a lot of good things happening around the world. And really collaborate. Collaboration is the key to innovation today. It's less about new technologies. It's more about bringing people together with different disciplines to work together to find new solutions. And that multidisciplinary thinking is where we find a lot of solutions to sustainable streets. With that, I'll pass it back to Michael. Thank you.
Thanks, Byron. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions real quickly. The first, it's not a question, because the reason for this is that Sujat is having some technical difficulties, and I think we're going to switch to Stephen. Stephen may or may not know this, and so while he is getting his computer and video turned on so that he can share his slides, I'm going to ask you this question. And the question is, well, there's two questions. One is that you seem to be showing some streets that are organized in terms of water flow, like some of the streets in Kabul and then the one outside Mumbai. That did you have any say into where the streets were going, better sustainability or water processing?
Well, in Kabul, obviously they were existing right-of-ways, but in Palava, in Dombivli, we worked on that whole master plan, and it was a complex process between the traffic planning, the spatial alignment of the buildings, the orientation north-south, the water flow, where we wanted to put the parks and the lakes to capture stormwater. So to some extent, we really find all of those factors into laying out the street networks in that kind of rational way, flowing kind of downhill to the river south of the site. And I think locating then the STPs and the recycled water tanks and the drinking water lines all followed on from that topography. But it was, it's a complex process to align the streets with many variables, not just water.
That is interesting, because a lot of oftentimes you read that in the literature about how to lay out streets or street layout and urban form and stuff like that. A lot of discussion about wind and solar and walkability and traffic flow and so forth and so on. Not a lot of discussion about stormwater management, for example. And so maybe this is another layer can be leveled on.
And I actually think in a broader master plan, one of the first things we always do is, what is the lowest part of the site? And that's probably where some lake or some park could be for stormwater collection and retention. And that's where often a utility zone will go as well. So maybe less about the streets exactly, but of an overall master plan or a neighborhood plan. The lowest areas are critical to know.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Stephen, if you want to take it from there and show us what you got.
Let's see if I can do that. Let's try this share the screen trick. Here we go. So Byron's actually quite fortuitously illustrated some of the things I want to talk about and what can happen if you do make good streets, because it's not, and I think as Michael alluded to, sometimes people lay out a city and then they just think, well, the street making is just the kind of tricky bit that goes at the finish. But it actually is, it's quite an important part of how you build your city. Those streets have to sustain the land use that's on them. So if it's a street where people live, you've got to be able to live there, be happy and healthy. If it's a street where you have mixed use, it's a village, then you do have to be able to live, work and play there. And naturally, of course, if it's part of your commercial centre, people have to be able to generate work, profit. They have to be able to generate some capital there. And in those good places, people are always looking for streets, and it doesn't matter what land use you're kind of generating, they're looking for cleaner, greener and safer places. Now, 30 years ago when we started to build streets, the fact that whether they were clean, green or safe was neither here nor there. It was a traffic modelist said, look, you have to make room for 20,000 cars, and you would go, yes, sir, and you would try and do that. But now, streets that are complete, that are part of your city, they have to be economic generators. It's very, very valuable community space. used by broad sections of the community from different demographics. If they don't like it, if they're not going to visit, if they're not going to spend time there, your street is not going to be a generator. It's not going to be a good place to live, not going to be a good place to work. It's not going to be a good place to play. And your city will suffer. It's not super rocket science. But it is broader than you think. It's not deeper. And Byron alluded to this about, looking across lots of disciplines to try and make your street better. You don't have to be a massive deep thinker about traffic engineering to make a good streets, but you do have to know about how to make it clean, green and safe, about all those different variations that Byron talked about in your street. Someone has to know about all of them or you're not going to get a good street. This is one of the great streets in Australia in a place called King's Cross in Sydney. And the shape of this street dictates how that whole community behaves. People walk down there, they stick, they stop, they stay and they spend. And this tiny little corner of the city is a massive economic driver for the broader city as a whole because it's a good street. But don't make them work too hard. The way you lay out your city, and the Kabul example is a great example of that, you can't make your streets work too hard or they just won't be happy, healthy places. So you have to lay out your city so that people aren't making unnecessarily long trips to do stuff, that they can do stuff in their own community, in their own village, which means that you can donate more of your street to productive things, cleaning stormwater, services in the street where people can stick, they can sit, they can gather, they can spend, the retailers can take more of the street. That's how your street makes money. The movement of mechanical machines is how your street loses money. That's where all your money goes out the window to try and make for that. So all those little spaces at the edge, you're trying to get it back. It's too difficult. So don't make your streets work too hard. Byron alluded to a bit of a process, and I follow a very similar one, is function has to come first. What things do you want to happen in this street? I mean, you might want cars to go down it, you might want a busway, but what things you want to happen on the edge, what land uses you want to prosper are very, very important. If you want people to live there, then it has to be a nice place to live where you won't be able to generate the economic return you need for your street to be sustainable. If you want to have stores there, if you want to have schools there, those things have got to be able to perform. So once you know what you want, then you can start to put some sort of form together. What infrastructure do I need so that those functions can happen, so that the street can prosper, so that the land use can be the best it can possibly be, and those people that live, work and play there can have happy and healthy lives. Now, there'll be times when someone says to you, look, that's not how we do it here, and Byron's alluded to it. You go to some municipalities and said, well, that's how they do it in Mumbai, or this is how they do it in Kabul, but, in Abu Dhabi, you have to do it like this. And it's kind of true, and so sometimes you just have to try it out. You can put temporary things in place just so you can experiment and say, look, how does this type of swale behave in this type of environment? Adjust it, measure, cost, and say, well, look, it would have been better if we do it this way. Phase 2, you can do it slightly differently, or even go back and change the one you put in. But don't say, look, the worst things can happen to the city is, oh, look, that's not how we do it here. But, the answer could be, well, not yet, but let's try it and see how we're going. Don't be frightened to measure, adjust, change, try again. One of the things about streets that people still sometimes get confused about is they think that they can provide for mechanical movement, so cars and trucks, and then also provide great places for people to prosper and to be. Now, the unfortunate thing about that is that the needs of the mechanical movement, the trucks, the buses and the cars, they're kind of the opposite to what humans want to get out of street space. And remember, moving those trucks and buses and cars are things that cost you money, and so you need to make humans, they have to enjoy the space for you to get your money back. So if you make it all about movement and not enough about exchange, the way the humans integrate with each other, then your city will slowly but surely just keep losing money. If you make it all about the movement and not about all those other things Byron talked about in your street, you will not prosper. It will be too difficult for you. Your streets will be working too hard and your city will always struggle. Now, I always develop these and I have them sitting on my desk to this day, and I keep changing them, I keep refining them, and you'll have access to this so you can copy some of mine if you like, but make your own. When you're working in street making and city making and development and all those different things that go into making streets, there is a lot of white noise. It's coming at you from everywhere. You're being pushed and pulled and change your mind. Oh, I want more of this. I want more space for this type of infrastructure. No, I want more space for this. You have to find a way to keep focused on what you're trying to achieve, which is a clean, green and safe space where the community can prosper long term. That is, that a space can be sustained. Sustainable, active place to where people can prosper. I've got a few there. Feel free to steal as many as you like. But by the same token, make your own local ones that when all that happens to you, you can stay focused and say, I know what I'm doing. These are my touchstones that I keep going back to. This is how I'm going to make a good community where I live. There we go. And on time.
So thank you for that. Rather efficient. So the question for you quickly is what's all this talk about economic development? I mean, just so try to put together. You had asked previously a question, or we talked about this question about the economic development and sustainability, and sustainability is defined as making something sort of continuous, sustainable, as it were. And so what you're arguing, or what you're positing, is that if the street is not economically sustainable, or the neighborhood or the community is not economically sustainable, then neither will the street be.
Indeed. It's too difficult for governments or private sector to just keep saying, oh, look, you know, this street, the mechanical movement is so high that the pavement keeps wearing out, the infrastructure keeps breaking. If that's all you're doing is keep pumping money back into a place, eventually you will run out. And so that the street, you know, is working too hard, it's going to break, it will deteriorate, then the land use can't prosper, then you can't offer jobs to your community, then that type of your village starts to, you know, sort of decay from the inside out. So, you know, you have to be able to generate enough income for that part of the village or that particular street to sustain itself long term. And certainly they can hunt in packs, which is what a great village is. You know, it's a bunch of streets hunting as a pack. But you can't get to the stage where your street just, you know, gets exhausted and you have to keep throwing money at it to sustain it. It's just, you know, as the very definition, it's unsustainable and eventually it will decay.
Right. So would you say that previously, or, you know, in the last, let's say, century, streets have been built, roads have been built basically for the function of moving vehicles, motorized vehicles. And let me see if I can say this correctly. And what you're arguing is that if you design and build a street or a corridor that only moves traffic, that is economically deficient.
Indeed.
It's a drain on the economy, and so, and by proxy, a lot of features that we might want to have in our streets, stormwater management, trees, cafes, other sorts of things that other people do, vending, or the streets for. The people who have been in charge of the streets, paying for the streets, have discounted those because they say they can't afford them because they break too often. But what you're saying is that the reason why they're discounting is because the street that you have built is in itself economically unsustainable and is a drain on the economy and is not Did I just say that right?
Yes, I think you did. They're blaming the wrong thing for the market failure, I guess. Yeah. So I said, oh, why do I have to keep rebuilding a street? Well, I'll have to take the swales out. And so they end up with a space that all it does is move machines, which is even more inefficient. And they have to keep pumping more and more money into it. So, you only get so much space to do all of that stuff. And, to say, look, that space, I mean, for a road is different than a street too, and that's probably worth keeping in mind. But for a street, this is places where people live, where they work, where they play, where you want to generate business, and your adjacent land use is very, very important. And you can't just say, look, I'm going to use this middle bit, this 7/8 of it for mechanical movement for trucks and cars, and then all that other stuff that the community desperately needs to sustain itself gets squeezed over into this tiny little edge. You just can't, you won't be able to sustain that. You have to have a better sharing of the space so that the street can generate, so that the land use can prosper and it can generate jobs, it can generate income, and then people, it becomes a valuable community space. Then that you might not be able to get so many cars down, but that's not where you win. You win by all those other things that Byron was talking about in his presentation.
Yeah, and Byron also in his cross section he said, X percentage of the right of way was used for moving vehicles, which left a very small percentage for any sort of infrastructure. And so what I try to do in my work, and you do as well, I know, is to push back on, like, why do you need 90% of the right of way to move your bloody lorries? Let's have a little bit of a discussion about how much of the space we need to allocate for what.
Indeed, Byron's cross sections actually showed quite a good evolution, because you could see how much trouble he was having at the start trying to squeeze all that really valuable stuff into such a really, stingy little space. And then, once he was able to influence the market to say, look, it turns out we can get better land use, we can get better stuff if we were a bit more generous with the bit that's green, the bit where you can walk, like all those stuff. And that's generating stuff, not degenerating stuff. It's places that create exchange, not places that are just solely based on movement.
Okay, well, thank you for that brilliant stuff, Stephen. So I'm going to, Sujata just sent me a smiley face emoji, which means he's ready to go.
Very good sign, isn't it?
Yeah, good sign to have a sunny smiley face. So over to you, Sujata.
Hi, I'm just sharing my screen now.
And and Byron and Stephen, if you want to pay attention to the Q&A there while she's talking, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Add Bluetooth extension.
There's a good conversation about how to do informal sector, and also this question about how to connect feeder units and distribution box. I don't know the answer to that. I assume it.
Can you see my screen?
We can see a screen. We assume it's yours.
Okay.
Got pictures. Yeah. Whoa, it's got a lot of pictures.
Yeah.
Now, once you hit present, it's going to have the bigger pictures. Take it away.
Yeah. Okay. So, hi, I'm Sujata Ingurani. I am from Oasis Design Singh. We are a multidisciplinary firm in Delhi. We are mostly working all over India on public realm projects. So, we are talking about streets today. So, let's focus on that and what is the primary function, as my previous two speakers also said, that the primary function is about movement of what? Motor vehicles, non-motorized transport, and pedestrian. Now, for each of these, the space given has to be according to their speed, according to their comfort, legibility, and safety. Street is also used for running our infrastructure, conduits, and also for access of shop fronts, buildings, and etc. But the problem in Indian cities is that we primarily, just focus on the vehicular infrastructure and we just leave the rest as is. And even if we give a footpath, it's actually a foot wide in lots of places. And sometimes the footpath is an extension of a drain top, and then it still does not solve the flooding in our cities. And if you look at the private infrastructure, what people focus is just within their property, and the outside is just left as is. So there is no integration of the private developers to the outside systems. So if we look at what is required in our cities is like holistic planning at a macro level. The best cities are planned around transit, and at the micro level, even policy decisions of our city authorities, like having setbacks and all, are in fact bad for the city in terms of safety, etc. And even the open spaces which are there in the city, the access and accessibility, and what kind of open spaces, which is like a requirement to have a better life. Especially during this COVID times, we realized that the open spaces are the safest for people. So as humans, we need public realm. It's not just like a pretty little thing. So what is public realm? Parks, Plaza Street, anything which is in the public and not private. But where are we spending all our money in? In India, we spend huge amounts of money. The government spends huge amount of money on making these car-based infrastructure. But then what are we doing to the cities? So like the quality of space is totally gone for a 6 if we just focus on the vehicular infrastructure. So we are looking at, if we look at user experience, and then though it's a little complex to design that UX, but this is what we should do. Then only our cities become, livable. But the problem in India is also that lot of agencies and how to work, with the different layers of, planning agencies coming together. So we have kind of learned over a period of time how to work with our Indian agencies through debate, negotiation, phasing, and keeping flexibility in mind. Now, our work is kind of, centered around mobility and water, and we work on various types of projects from streetscapes to urban parks, waterfront, and greenway. And we've learned a lot from our co-partners who are transport planners and urban designers, and it can't be like a single lens thing. So we have to look at all the aspects when we are looking at, public spaces in our city. And we have been lucky to work on many cities, and what we focus is on heritage of a particular city. We look at the city from its own point of view, contemporary aspect and natural features, and how they are interrelated to each other. We've also had the privilege of working on some very important policy contributions like the UTPEC Street Design Guidelines. We worked on the TOD study of the first of its kind project in Delhi, and we've also worked on the stormwater management guidelines for IRC. This is one project I would like to share with you, in which how we have kind of turned around a public space into a space more than what it can be. This was a metro station in Chhatarpur. It was basically in the center is the metro station, and on either side there was parking. So what we did was to understand what are the activities around, and then we just managed the whole system around the movement lines. And then we realized that we really don't need so much of space, and there was a parking lot at the back. So we utilized that parking lot, and because it was a running station, we phased out the whole, project in such a way that slowly all the parking could move behind. So, so this was what it was earlier, and now through only the movement lines and leaving the rest of it green and landscape plaza, this whole place has kind of turned around. And this is like a desire line which is going to the junction, and this below is going to the multimodal auto stands and everything. Rest of the area is left as landscape. And this is the place where you can get your IPT and autos and all. And it's won some awards. We have been doing street designs since 2010. During that time, we did, understand the, various aspects of street. And this is in 2010. Right now, we are working on, again, like some networks of streets in Delhi, including in the NDMC area. Again, we are looking at it from the aspect of how to optimize. I think my earlier two speakers also talked about, equity and how you give space to the people on our streets. So this is what we are doing. These are some before afters. Even the under flyover area, this is a place in Delhi, Narayana, which doesn't have any open space. So the under flyover area is going to be, looked at like a public space so that it can be used. There are a lot of these open spaces which have a swale by themselves. So we are just going to landscape it, develop it like a dry swale, and when the water comes in, so we'll make it like that. So the project had started just before this coronavirus came in, but now it's kind of become a little slow. But we are adding all of this. But there is a problem again, like in this case, the agency, the road owning agency is PWD, and behind is MCD. So how we talk to the other agencies so that some additional water can go to the park and all, that has to be looked at. In NDMC, we are doing some streets which are in the CBD area, but right now the streets are basically, there is a service lane and there is a lot of parking lot in the front side of it. So what we are telling them that there is some parking in the back of the building, so shift all the parking there so that the front of the, next to the street can become a pedestrian plaza. Similarly, there is this Parakhamba road, again, like we are going to have a full plaza instead of a service road out here. Now, this is a project in Pune where, again, we were working on a network of street, and this is the pilot street which really came up quite well. This is the JM road. Again, we optimized the street. Earlier, it was a two-way street, which, again, it was very wide. So we made the optimization of space, and we looked at this whole space as a public, social space, where like people can, sit around and just be there. So how, from the start, how we took the easiest part and then, move forward so that we can get a buy-in from the shopkeepers. So this was next to a garden area where the whole space we made it. Then the shopkeepers were happy to, incorporate it. The whole street design. The junction also, whatever additional space was there, we took it up and again made it into a plaza. So like, because it was a one-way street, so we could actually make the geometrics of the junctions in this way. Now, Baden was talking about the value of the place. Actually, we have seen on real time how the the front setbacks were changed into shopping, and how the boundary walls were moved and changed, became more into active space and different activities which were taking place. This is the final project I would like to show you. This is in Coimbatore that we are doing. This is part of the Smart City project where 35 kilometers of NMT system we are making around the existing lakes. These lakes were basically designed by the Cholas, which were the earlier rulers of this Tamil Nadu. But rest of the area was just lying like that. So we are reviving the areas around the lakes into public space, and we are building in the stormwater management systems within the landscape so that it becomes like a showcase for people to see. And then all the drains that are opening onto the lake, we are treating it through phytolith treatment for so that good water comes in. Some parts of the project are already done, and each and every space is being utilized. Like this was under the flyover, the space was just lying like that. We are making it like now it's become like this. So each and every lake space is being treated differently to extract the best out of the space. And we are also looking at the O&M so that the whole project becomes viable without it being a strain on the government. So if once the project will be done, the influence area will be around 100 square meters of the entire city, and I think basically it should become a benchmark. And I would like to end here by saying that we should not waste even an inch of public space in our city, and give it back to the people in the best possible way. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujata. That was quite wonderful. I want to quote you, or sort of quote you. I think you said a drain cover is not necessarily a footpath.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is true in my observations around the world, that the traffic engineers say that there's a bunch of pavement and then there's a bunch of roadway asphalt, and then there's some bit of a storm drain on the side, and they cover it up and they put lights in it, and they say, oh, this looks like people can walk there too. Done. And yeah, it's really, I mean, these are the kind of things, because like in the Q&A, one of the questions was, how do you overcome bills, legislation, policies which are inherently formulated to advocate for motorized vehicles? And one of in the previous webinar, we talked about safe streets, and we talked about the IRC, Indian Road Congress guidelines, and one of the specific things there was that the road guidelines call for at least a minimum 1.5 meter wide footpath, maybe larger on different situations, but at a minimum 1.5, and for wheelchair, and basically in my view, that's 1.5 is 2 wheelchairs can pass each other. It's kind of the standard around the world. It should be larger in a lot of places. But the point is that the IRC guidelines say you got to have 1.5 meter minimum footpath. And to me, that means 1.5 meters clear. That means smooth, like, okay, I can go someplace with 1.5 meters. That does not mean 1.5 meters with a light post here and a drain here and a parking thing here, a bus stop here, and another thing there, and another thing there. And but my point is that, so back to the Q&A, how do you combat these policies which are inherently formulated to advocate for motorized vehicles? And what I would argue is that not only are we trying to combat the policies, we're actually trying to combat the interpretation of those policies or the implementation of those policies, when in fact the policy might be good. It might be a good policy. I mean, it's very clear. 1.5 meters clear footpath is a very clear, okay, I get it, right? Okay, so it's the implementation of that. So how do you combat the implementation? And this is where I think that the lovers of the sustainable street, the progressive street, people who are trying to change, invert the dominant paradigm, this is our failure, because we do not. And with apologies to Byron, who's an engineer, is that we bow down to the engineers who read their book and present a whole bunch of numerical mumbo jumbo and say this is that evermore. And as I believe Depeche Mode once saying, bow down to whom you serve, to the one you serve. And yeah, That's what you're going to get. What you deserve. Bow down, whom you serve. You're going to get what you deserve. So that's on us, I think. Now let's. The other thing, Sujata, I'd like to compliment you on is the documentation of issues, good photographs that are sort of marked up, and showing the footpath with the thing, and showing the garbage over here and this and over there and the arrows and stuff like that, which is really good. And I think that what we're finding also is that people are becoming very adept with videos and with photography and with marking up things and posting the stuff and pushing this out into the public sphere. So with that, let me, Just finished, and so Swapna might have some questions that I had pre-written. There are some, while we look at that, Jata, there's a Q&A, there's a queue for you in the Q&A thing. There's somebody who says they're from Pune and they love to hang out on JM Road.
Yeah.
Sujata, if you could answer that other one, that would be good. Swapnil is putting the was. But go back to this number one question. I want to ask the three of you. We have a half hour left, but we don't have to take all that time. But anyway, and if anyone has any, if any of the participants have any questions, just feel free to throw them in the Q&A, and I'll read them off. So, but this number one question about the dictionary definition, and I would say that this is actually, so discuss. What do you, Byron, Stephen, or Sujata, what do you have to say about this statement?
I can go first if you like. I think that it actually goes back to your previous comment about we've got these rules that say, and particularly for roads, which are different to streets, and because of that, they should have different rules for a start. But what we perhaps don't do is to prove that, look, this way of making streets so that humans can survive and they can prosper, the reason it's better is because we measured it and we found out that the human experience in these streets that have green space, that harvest water, that clean water, that give places to rest, that give them proper adequate footpaths to walk on in the shade, out of the rain, all those places that you do that, we've measured them and we found out that people like them better, they will invest more money in them, they will generate more jobs, and they take less maintenance to look after as a burden on the economy. So every time you invest in streets like that, as opposed to just hard up curb to curb with a minimum footpath that gets junked up with poles that are squeezed into the edge, every time you do that, you've given yourself the term financial and economic burden if you want to sustain it. So doing it that way, and we've measured it, and we've checked, and we've proven it to you time and time again, that when you do it that way, you cannot sustain it. You're always going to go back to the well to finance that, to stop it depleting or being permanently damaged.
Actually, sustainability has not kind of entered the dictionary in our language of the engineers who are making the streets in our city. So it's what they generally do is just do the black top, the vehicular movement, and just leave the rest as is. So in IRC, they will look at what is there in terms of what is the requirement of the carriageway width, but they will not look at the width of the footpath that is required or the other stuff. So we have tried advocacy efforts with the engineers also, but it's kind of not really translating into them, all of them being educated about this, because people just keep on doing their own things. Like the projects that we are doing, we will improve the streets on those projects. But if we want a systemic change to happen, it has to happen at the level in which all the engineers, everybody comes into the picture and understand what the street should be like, and why it's absolutely important to. It's like a non-negotiable which we have to tell them to do. So.
Swapna, can you go to question number 3? Unless Byron wanted to weigh in on that one. So this question, should there be let's just talk about stormwater specifically. Should there be a general requirement that all streets and roads process stormwater within their own right of way? By and the opposite true, should properties have to process?
Yeah, so actually, what this is a debate we've had with our, our agencies, that we will take all the water in of the general area, but maybe the streets will not suffice to the green areas in the street may not suffice to contain all the water. So it has to be the properties as well as the streets, holistically looking at how to manage the stormwater within that particular area. So we can't just look at one aspect of that. This is my.
Byron, what's your thought on this? I would agree with Sujata. She said it quite well. The one thing I've seen in my experience is that roadways tend to deal with their own stormwater that falls on the road itself. That's an easy thing to design. But it really, as Sujata was saying, it takes a broader perspective. Every property is going to have some runoff on a heavy rain. You have to really zoom out and across property boundaries and think about watersheds instead of property lines to manage stormwater. And the only place to convey that is in channels or in streetways. So highly urbanized areas have to manage the stormwater of their adjacent properties. And they do know, even if you design it or not, that's what's happening. So, you really have to zoom out as to a watershed scale instead of the property or the right of way.
This is a personal issue for me, because in my house, my property, I've designed it so that it processes all of the water, all the rainwater from the roof and from that falls on my properties. I process it internally with a very large French drain. And I think there's other people who are sort of passing legislation or thinking about legislation that each sort of property has to figure out how to do it itself. And then one way to sort of to have that happen is to charge or somehow create some sort of payment system that if you have zero runoff, it's free. But if you, it's sort of like the reverse of a water charge.
In Bangalore, they are doing, in certain colonies, they are doing rainbow colony charging for throwing
kind of
water
like reverse water charge. Yeah. Swapna, number 6, could you down to that? So, this is for all three of you. Let's just talk super positive. What's the most beneficial? Organization, regulation, information, direction, training. What's the thing that you found that flips the switch?
You want me to go?
Sure.
We are right now. Earlier we were doing street packages with in Pune as like part of like a 30-kilometer package, and now we have got in Chennai. Again around the 30-kilometer package. With us, there are other consultants who are looking at. So ITDP has been quite key in the advocacy and talking to the various agencies and trying to figure out. So like we need advocacy experts to kind of convince the government agencies to do the right thing, and then bring in, make the packages, bring in consultants. So like at least initially the consultants have to come in, and once we get that tipping point in which things start moving on their own, when people see enough change happening, that is going to be the tipping point. But right now I think this is a good start, and like we should continue doing it like that, so that whoever knows about these street designs and all, they keep on doing this, and then later on the engineers will take it through.
So, but what you're advocating and what you're suggesting is that if you hire the right people, you will get the right results. And
right now the engineers don't know, the people who are responsible for making the streets, for implementing streets, they don't know what to do. So like I think some hand-holding is required right now.
So you would vote for training.
Yeah, but training through work. Not like they'll just sit in some seminar, not like that. Let them work on certain projects, then only it's going to happen. Otherwise, I don't think so. Because we have done trainings and all, but then like they forget about it and do their own thing. So and then also budgets. The budget has to be allocated for a specific, more budget should be allocated for the street design rather than just putting in the blacktop carriageway kind of a thing. So the city should have that budget allocated.
Any Byron or Stephen, any input on this?
The information thing is quite important. I was a road traffic engineer for the first part of my career, and I genuinely thought that I was helping. And when I discovered later on that I wasn't, I was a bit heartbroken. That I was actually making these city worse instead of better. And the reason that I changed my mind was someone gave me the information, collected the data, and said, Steve, look, I'll show you. Every time you do that, this gets bigger, this gets smaller, we have to pay more. These people's lives are diminished. You've got to stop that. If I didn't know, I wouldn't have known. So collecting information, collecting data, doing analysis, going back to your central governments, the people who make regulation, the organisations that can be good advocates, they can't help you if they don't know. They have to know. Every time you put in one of those slip lanes, every time you put some extra green time on your signal, every time you add a new parking space in, every time they do that, your city is diminished. I'll show you. I'll prove it to you. Here's all the data. Here's all the information you need to decide that this is now that we know, I've got to know all this information, we can now do it like this.
So your answer is information, and that's on us. We have to document.
Yes, collect, analyze.
Disseminate, yeah. Byron, what's your experience been?
I actually would add the word design. My experience, when we travel to any given city around the world and we show images that are compelling and exciting, and all engineers are going to push back on things that are issues, and you got to work with those, and you can design and you can solve problems, but the most important thing is to come with a good idea and drawings and renderings, and make it having a positive attitude and trying to get everyone on board, the communities on board, and regulators on board, and budget setting on board through inspiring design. Trying to fight the battle with carrots and not sticks, just sort of making streets exciting and functional and positive. And working within constraints is something we always do on every project, of course, but I found it most effective when we walk into a room with great drawings and good ideas and a positive collaborative attitude. We can usually find some middle ground to make forward progress.
Your answer is carrot, not sticks.
Yeah, and you know, we do a lot of work with big, you know, there's just sort of like all they do is make these beautiful images, and everyone's like, great, I want that.
Yeah.
We work with great architects and great landscape architects who inspire. People are going to say, yes, that was great. You know, here's some constraints. Can you work with this? Can you work with that? But yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Just a couple more questions. Sujata, there's a question in the Q&A for lighting.
Yeah, so, just 1 second.
How do you incorporate lighting in your designs?
Yeah, so basically, lighting is something which we have kind of burnt our fingers before with by trying to do too much in terms of effects and all. So first we try to look at lighting which will, safety is the first aspect. Second is that it should be tamper proof, or in India there's a lot of theft. So we have to look at the height of the light fixture itself should be difficult for the people who are trying to snatch it. And apart from that, we love lighting, but again, we generally work with Philips and all of these people, to figure out solutions which will give you all the effects plus safety all the aspects. So we like to work on lighting. Of course, it creates a different kind of ambience on our things. So.
Okay, well, thanks for that. So we're about out of time, and so let's call it a day or a morning or an evening, as it were, for wherever you are in the world. So thanks again to our three presenters, Sujata, Byron, and Stephen. Thanks to Swapnil for coordinating. Thanks to, what is his name, who actually did the technically and set up everything so that all we had to do was log in and make this thing work. Whoever you are, I appreciate it. Give yourself 3 cheers. And so with that, I will turn it over to Swapnil, who will talk us out.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael, for moderating the session for us, and to all the panelists for really taking out time to be, a part of this. So a very interesting webinar, some really good insights and key takeaways. I think one definite takeaway from all your presentations would be that there is tremendous opportunity for considering and assessing sustainable options in the way we design and plan our streets. I think it should be targeted towards benefiting not just the economy and the environment, but most importantly, the people whom we design it for. So to the participants, thank you so much for your active participation and for storming our Q&A today. Yeah, so please keep following our webinar webpage. The link to the webpage has been shared with you on the chat. Yeah, and please also feel free to share your feedback with us over email. Yeah, and see you all at the next webinar. Thank you.